Welcome to tonight's lecture, Assemblages by Matmos. My name is Heather. I'm an instructor here, and I'm a Matmos virgin. While I know a bit about their music, I've never seen a live performance. So I'm very excited about tonight's event. I would say Matmos seems to be an experimental music practice that transcends genre. The kind of hard to categorize nature of what they do gives it a sort of elasticity in application. Their output includes an exhibition at the Whitney Museum of American Art, a world tour with Björk, and soundtracks for gay porn. Matmos is the collaborative effort of MC Schmidt and Drew Daniel. In the true collaborative spirit, both partners have unique intellectual and creative pursuits outside of their work together. MC Schmidt is a visual artist. He manages the conceptual art department at the San Francisco Institute of Art, and he's a member of another musical practice titled Ear, Nose, Throat, or ENT. Drew Daniel completed his dissertation on the literary cult of the melancholic at Berkeley. He's a published writer and assistant professor in the Department of English at Johns Hopkins, and he performs as the one-man act under the title The Soft Pink Truth. Initially, it seemed kind of odd to me that an avant-garde music collaboration would lecture at the School of Architecture, but after closer examination, I can see a sympathetic ethos between Matmos and SCI-Arc. Both demand experimentation and both interrogate the conventions of their discipline. Matmos' recordings include sounds of Bible pages turning, of card shuffling, of conversations in a hot tub, and of whoopee cushions, to name just a few. The relationship between the parts of the music described above and the music as a whole ranges wildly from the synthetic to the dissonant. At times, the transitions between one sound and another is undetectable, and at other moments, the abrupt transition will produce dramatic effect through the amplification of difference. But what's interesting about Matmos is that the details of how the music is made and the effects of its overall sound shift our understanding of what music is, and begs the question, who says what music is? So, without further ado, Matmos, please.
Professional things, so there may there's going to be a little fumbling in between some things. For example, the biggest fumble that I have so far is that does anyone here want to get a very, very short haircut?
I got one.
Number one on the it's you know about that. Yeah, whoever's being popular, come on. It's the third piece, but it'll be obvious because I'll come and get it. I'll do that. Does it take a little more right yet? Is that working? Yeah. Okay. Polaroid, a company that doesn't exist anymore and never made a DVD player. No. What is that?
So if you want to leave,
Yeah, feel, this talking part, you don't have to stay for it.
I mean, I'm very ambivalent about it because, I have a PhD from Berkeley. I teach Renaissance literature. I live and breathe this stuff. I don't, resent theory. On the other hand, as a working artist, I'm quite aware of the way that people who have a certain education can aggressively wield that education to make claims for their art that the art itself, on its own power, can't achieve.
Right.
And, so it's a little bit spooky to gear shift from the moment of performance into the moment of actually just talking about what's at stake in your work. That said, we're going to have it go. Once my laptop accepts the fact that now it's plugged into the second projector. Normally shows are in stereo and maybe lectures have one video projector, but
We're in quad and we have 2 video projectors.
yes! So the economics of base might be another topic to discuss. Shoot, my laptop hates that I just shut it and plug in the projector and then pick it up.
So that last piece was about Darby Crash.
Yeah, we were thinking about, what are we doing here? Is this an artist's talk? And like an artist's talk, in our case, can often be a slightly redundant exercise where you describe where we met. I was a go-go dancer at Club Uranus on the bar, gyrating, wearing a fish-shaped jockstrap, and Mark put a dollar in my G-string. Which is cute, that's and true. But very quickly, if you've been doing what we've been doing for 18 years, then it can devolve into, first I made this piece, then I made that piece.
And that list goes on for a very long time.
Yeah, long ass time. We made 8 albums at this point. We've been a couple of bands for 18 years, so you have to be a little bit selective. And in terms of thinking about the invitation to this space, Queer Assemblages leapt out of me as a title because the topic of the assemblage, how to theorize with the word assemblage, what an assemblage could designate, has been on my mind because of theoretical work, because of emergent new languages, and specifically queer theory. I'm thinking of Björk's book, Terrorist Assemblages. I don't know if any of you have read that book.
They're all nodding.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's dark. And essentially, I think the assemblage might be a portable way to talk about our sound gathering and song creation process that might reach over to other ways of working, maybe even architectural ways of working. And as a result, I wanted to play you a few examples of our early work and talk about them in relation to what an assemblage might be. Wow. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, yeah. Sweet. Now, your punishment for everything working is the ninth circle of hell, PowerPoint. PowerPoint is, of course, as we know, a kind of time-sucking vortex in which middle managers spend too much time making their new human resources ideas fly across the presentation.
Graduate and you work at that firm. Oh, it's going to be great.
So the PowerPoint section of this presentation will be mercifully brief. Martin feels that he's already died when I present a PowerPoint presentation about our own band. So if he starts to kind of walk around zombie-like on the stage, just a headshot, I think, is sufficient to kill a zombie. So here we go.
Come on, that was a laugh line. Headshot, zombie.
They're easy.
Doesn't anybody play video games?
Wait. Yeah, okay. Queer assemblages, to my mind, is not gay assemblages. It's not gay and lesbian. That is the queer, as recently theorized by people like Leo Bersani and Lee Edelman, is whatever resists legibility, whatever avoids a certain kind of nominative presence or positive ontology. It's whatever kind of escapes conceptual grids. So queerness is attractive to me not because of a rainbow flag kind of rah-rah identitarian community-building ethos, but rather it's resistance to all sorts of categories. What do you do when you stick the word queer next to assemblages? Because assemblages has, I think, a more or less positive content. It is a organization of contents or a set of relationships between forms that is extended. When we make music, that's the end of a long process that usually starts with conceptualizing, but can also start with just looking around at what's in the room, what do we own, what do we have, what sounds good to us. When we started to make music together, we would just curate objects and sound them and see what sounded good to us, what sounded compelling on its own terms, regardless of whether it was or wasn't real music. Often inspired by musique concrète, the sort of French studio-based practice begun by Pierre Schaeffer in the studios of Radio France in Paris during the Nazi occupation. We would make pieces out of a single sound source. Here's an example of an early track made entirely from the human body. So, as you can hear, my experience pole dancing and stripping on a bar for cash kind of shows up sonically in the structures that we've got here, which are very much inspired by electro. Anything
Never pole dance.
Anything that's
Not true.
I did once with Kate Moss at a Björk after party.
Once. Okay. It's not skills.
But Bobby Gillespie was there too, and he smelled really bad. Okay, so what we've got here is the language, of course, of pop music. This is not deep. We don't have a degree in music. We can't play, Happy Birthday to me. I mean, we have no musical talent. We're complete charlatans if we're assessed by the yardstick of traditional musical practice. But what we're doing is essentially borrowing the conceptual commitments of musique concrète, where you pick a sound source and you try to exploit it as much as possible. The first example of which is probably Pierre Henry's piece, Variations for a Door and a Sigh. Has anybody heard that piece?
Really? No?
Oh, come on.
Who's heard Pierre Henry? Oh, thank God.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Pierre Henry was obsessed by the sound that a squeaky door in the attic of a French country house made, and he spent 6 months just recording every possible squeak and noise and blurb and groan that this door could create. And he worked with this object and just sort of massaged and manipulated its sounds into this completely flexible and elastic musical vocabulary. It's very inspiring, so we ripped him off. And we took this idea of working with a single source, in this case, human body sounds, and then you think about, well, what's your target? If you started from this place, where are you trying to go? In this case, since I wanted to make something to grind to while go-go dancing, I thought I would make a kick drum. So you take a bub or a pup, and you strip out all the high end so that it is purple, more like
My mic doesn't have space.
bass, like this, just bass, no high end. And then to make the hi-hats, you strip out everything but the highs and go.
So you can use very simple frequency modulation to sculpt the givenness of the acoustically real, and then you just do it again and again and again, lay out a vocabulary, and then construct that with sequencing software so that it's the kind of thing that can now be used to sell a Lexus. That is, the awful truth about this technique is that it's not inherently critical to do musique concrète. There's no oppositional friction implicit in that. In fact, Pepsi asked us to make a jingle out of Pepsi cans, you know, using more or less the style.
And we tried.
But they didn't like what we made. See, if I was all indie, I'd be like, fuck the man, we're never doing that. Fuck that shit.
But nobody cares anymore, right? That's all over, right?
Part of what happens, though, is that in working
I'm
this
just giving
way...
you money, it's okay now, right? Because you gotta make a living, right? Right?
Session, y'all.
Right?
It only shows up for people as, wow, you made that jam entirely out of slowed down kisses or latex clothing or a bowl of oatmeal or a cow uterus, all of which we've used.
Or the American Petroleum Institute. Because that's okay, right?
Great, yeah. That only happens if you tell people about it. And this is why our music, for me, constitutes an assemblage, because it's not just the acoustically immanent fact of the sound waves in a space being played, but it's the way that information modulates what you're hearing and expands and multiplies it. And so the music becomes not the audio, but the relationship between information, concepts, and language acting on the way that you hear. So we made a record out of the sound of an amplified synapse from crayfish neural tissue. And if we hadn't mentioned that fact, we would just be another boring techno band in the clearance bin. Nobody would remember us. I mean, we're in the clearance bin and nobody remembers us, but let's bracket that. The point is that because we told people in the liner notes, and yes, in the press release, that we had sampled a crayfish nerve tissue, when they listened, they weren't listening to an exercise in abstraction, but felt that somehow listening was bringing them closer to some moment of the bodily real. Oh, let's go back. Rewind, come again. Yes. Here we go. German people would listen to while doing unspeakable things to each other in a garret.
And in fact, it has been the music for that. I have no question.
But in addition to that, the fact that that was made out of crayfish nerve tissue gave people a way into electronic music, which in general is regarded as kind of up its own ass and forbidding and or content free, which can be quite liberating. But I think it gave people a linguistic hook, a way in, because the music suddenly was supposed to bridge some sort of gap between machines and bodies, or between animals and humans, or between the electrical firing of a synapse and the electrons in the storage of electronic music itself. That is, what we try to work with is the poetics of the way that information acts upon sound and acts upon listening. To that extent, we're as interested in working with objects for their poetic capacities as for their sonic capacities. That said, we made a lot of recordings that we thought were going to turn out to sound cool, and in fact they don't. And we don't use them. There's a certain failure rate with recordings.
We recorded the sound of someone having their nose broken in order to have a rhinoplasty nose surgery. And they do this by using a hammer and a nose.
And like a chisel.
Yeah, and a chisel. And it makes a really boring sound. It sounds much like, not even as good as pencil breaking.
Yeah, you read hard-boiled fiction, and it's always the wet snap of bone.
Yeah, it's more like the dry click of bone.
Yeah, it sounds like one of those peanuts that Southwest Airlines gives you. So the point is that we are bouncing off of a limit, which is an acoustic limit provided by the real. And that's why it actually matters that we go to these events to record a real experience. Because if we wanted to just synthesize stuff...
I'm not saying that you couldn't make a good satisfying noise by breaking someone's bone. Because unquestionably, there is a good noise in there. But there wasn't in the surgery that we were in on the day that...
Well, God knows there's some people where it would be incredibly satisfying to break their bones. But,
that's not what I said.
oh, sorry. Q&A? Anyone? No. We have a few more points to make before we'll open this out. And yeah, to return to the question of the real, why bother? Why go to the effort of finding snails, putting them in a glass tube, buying a photovoltaic light-sensitive theremin, shooting a laser through the glass tube at the photovoltaic theremin, getting the snails to crawl up the glass and play a theremin solo by interrupting the path of a laser with their eye stalks? Why do that? Well, because we're making a song about one of our favorite hard-boiled writers, Patricia Highsmith.
Because we were making a song about Patricia Highsmith.
Obviously. And this brings us, I guess, to queer assemblages as a recent way of working. The assemblage...
Have you heard of Patricia Highsmith?
Talented Mr. Ripley? Right. Assemblages. Oh, the obligatory Gilles Deleuze quotes have to happen now, right? Or we don't get to we don't get to file our dissertation.
Yay.
Why did we call it assemblages? Because in assemblages you find states of things, bodies, various combinations of bodies, hodgepodges, but you also find utterances, modes of expression, and whole regimes of signs. This is Deleuze explaining what he means by the word assemblage, or in French, agencement. And it's a handy tag for the way that you can construct a relationship across different conceptual levels. We're accustomed to the idea that there's more and less real stuff. You know, there's rocks and there's burgers and then there's bravery or cuteness. But recently in what's called object-oriented philosophy, also actor network theory, people are pushing for what's called a flat ontology. A flat ontology would be a science of being that makes no distinction between the more or less conceptual, the more or less material. It tries to bracket the entire question of what would be a real object or not, and it flattens those distinctions. This is, I think, a handy way of thinking about the way that creativity could be the creation of relations across a flat ontology that would level down the difference between crayfish nerve tissue as sound, crayfish nerve tissue as baseline, funkiness, and the grid. All of those things are sewn together in the kind of assemblage we like to make. The trouble is, how do you give an organic or inherent coherence to the assemblages that you just impose? That's where craft comes in, and where, I guess, a certain pop sensibility comes in. To the extent that we're sellouts, we actually want to make a record that you would care about.
Craft.
Ooh, is that a dirty word?
Not at an architecture school.
Oh, shit, sorry.
No, it's okay. Just not an art school.
Oh, all right. Fine art school, craft bad. Commercial art school, craft good.
I'm guessing. Am I right?
Is craft a dirty word?
School here, right?
Craft is not a dirty word.
Right.
Okay,
Nice.
thank you.
See,
The point is, if
I
you
spent 12 years at art school, so, and I
then-
personally don't feel that craft is a dirty word. And then, yeah, so, anyway.
the point is, if you
I
embrace
just
the
had to say
idea,
something. So I occasionally.
if you embrace a flat ontology, then anything goes, and then you're going to make a lot of arbitrary garbage, because the idea of collage is not inherently interesting. And we've all heard horrific acid techno with loops of Buddhist monks chanting, and we've realized that you can take anything and lay it on top of anything, and the result is a bunch of tasteless, boring slop. So, collage or assemblage as such is not good enough. That is, you have to work towards the creation of some kind of coherent or consistent form, but it has to emerge and fight for its right to survive precisely because you're forcing things from a lot of different levels of reality to live together. Conceptual levels, metaphoric levels, poetic levels, musical levels, sonic levels, marketing, capitalist dissemination, and journalism levels, economy. They're all part of the equation. You're probably used to this because when you're designing a building, you're thinking about physics, you're thinking about form, you're thinking about art history, you're thinking about community, you're thinking about law, you're thinking about who is included or excluded by your form, you're thinking about your agonistic relationship to your advisor. You're leveling an affective or emotional investment in the work with a long historical arc, with emergent conditions that might change. That's very close to the kinds of things that we're thinking about when we're trying to make a song, how to make these axes hold together. I'm going to skip some Deleuze and Guattari because frankly, fuck it, you guys can read 1,000 Plateaus. At this point, what is it, 2010? The book was written in 1980. Do we really need 30-year-old theories?
Yeah, I mean, how long does the theory last? Like, what, 3 years?
3 weeks. In trying to think about sort of song as assemblage, and I'll move on shortly, I guess the point is simply that it is the forcing of a relationship between bodies and signs, that we force some kind of connection or think we're doing that, and it can cohere or not, depending on whether there is some sort of organic consistency to the way that we've made objects, instruments, and sounds tethered directly to the kinds of driving concepts that guide the work.
Wow, can you see that there are actual heat waves coming off of your silhouette?
That's trippy.
No, only when you're up about 1
Okay.
foot. Stop. Does anyone else see that? That is rad. That's sort of my job in the band, that sort of thing. It's like inspiration. Man.
So, a last example of queer assemblages.
But it is cool.
Should I turn on the thermogram app on my iPod Touch so you can see the
Totally.
heat readings? Was our decision to work biographically, and here I guess would be another way to cash out what a queer assemblage is. We decided to make an album that would be a kind of party in heaven of all our favorite queer heroes and icons, and to make biographical portraits of different people that we admire. And the result was a list of titles, which I came up with first, before any of the music had been made. I just imagined a set of names and a set of objects that to me might articulate something essential about that person's life. And in every case, it required reading their biographies, thinking about their work, thinking about what they did, thinking about how to turn a life into a piece of music. And the solution in general was to pick essential events in all of these people's lives and reenact an event from their life and then make music out of the sounds generated during the reenactment. So for example, King Ludwig II of Bavaria decided to serve dinner to his favorite horse, and the horse freaked out and destroyed everything in this banquet hall, and so we reenacted this with Martin playing coconuts on the floor.
I was the horse. Thanks.
We don't have time to do every song. You're welcome. We don't have time to do every song on this record, but I would like to show you at least an example of how we represented my favorite passage from Ludwig Wittgenstein's Philosophical Investigations. This is a text that, to me, models or realizes what an assemblage would be. That is, it's another way of thinking about a relation that extends across different conceptual levels, but that coheres. So the passage, Martin, if you will.
Christ. A newborn child has no teeth. A goose has no teeth. A rose has no teeth. This last, at any rate, one would like to say, is obviously true. It is even sure that a goose has none. Yet, it is not so clear. For where should a rose's teeth have been? The goose has none in its jaw, and neither, of course, has it any in its wings. But no one means that when he says it has no teeth. Why, suppose one were to say the cow chews its food and then dungs the rose with it, and so the rose has teeth in the mouth of a beast. This would not be absurd because one has no notion in advance of where to look for teeth in a rose. And this is a connection with pain in someone else's body, which is another part of the philosophical investigations.
We decided to make music based on this passage. This passage has a lot of what I really love about Wittgenstein, which is precisely the way that his examples that illustrate nonsense or failures in language or problems in language take on a kind of poetic independence from their function. They're supposed to illustrate or model a larger problem where language gets confused and generates a false philosophical problem that we have to therapeutically dissolve by being a little more precise about our attention to meaning. But in fact, the passages seem to fight and break free and become these sort of strangely lyrical, Vulcan-like observations. In this case, the observation of a weird interspecies symbiotic assemblage. What we have here is an assemblage of rose, dung, teeth, cow, which articulates across time and across this ecosystem a kind of ongoing relation in which the rose can be said to have teeth. So what starts out as an example of a nonsense statement, a newborn child has no teeth, a goose has no teeth, a rose has no teeth. Well, why does a rose has no teeth stick out? Well, it sticks out because we don't expect roses to have teeth. But Wittgenstein is able to imagine a situation in which roses would have teeth precisely because they constitute part of an assemblage, an interspecies assemblage, a collaboration, if you will, with the cow. So how do you turn that into music? This was our attempt to do exactly that.
A newborn child has no teeth. A goose has no teeth. A rose has no teeth. This laughter in the rain. One would like to say, it is obviously true. It is even sure that a goose has not, and yet it is not so clear. For where should the rose be have been? The goose has not been discovered, and neither, of course, has it been explained. But no one means that when he says, I have no teeth. Why suppose one might say, the cow chooses teeth and then dumps the rose with it. So, the rose has teeth, it is not for the teeth. The rose has teeth, it is not for the teeth.
The rose has teeth in the mouth of this. The rose has teeth in the mouth of this.
This is not absurd because one has no.
So we got our friend Björk to recite that text and used her for 3 seconds as a record company immediately made a huge sticker on our album that says, featuring Björk!
And we tried. We were like, she's on it for 3 seconds.
We felt like such whores. So
It feels bad.
what we did was not deep, not advanced, not terribly avant-garde. I'd say that our approach is in fact thuddingly, crushingly literal. We tried to acquire every object referred to in the Wittgenstein passage.
It's an aquarium? Make the building shaped like a fish!
Oh, you're designing a hospital? Make it shaped like a giant Band-Aid. We would be like terrible architects, I think, for that reason. I mean, is Chandigarh shaped like a spleen or something? Anyway, we acquired the objects referred to in the Wittgenstein text. So that meant going out to a farm where there were cows and gathering manure and dumping shit onto roses. We tried to like get cows to actually shit on the roses.
And then we tried to feed, of course, the roses to the cows, and the guy who owned the farm came running over and was like, don't feed my cows roses.
And then I had a lot of friends that had wisdom teeth out that had saved their wisdom teeth because my friends are like that, and so I got to use their team.
Wait, technical side note. You should not do field recordings with a Shure 57.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm there photographed doing it. It's a stupid thing to do. They make a shitty field recording microphone. You're in school, and if you get anything from me,
They have bills for it.
There are better that I recommend.
So
The AT 822 by Audio-Technica.
yeah, SM57 is like a good sort of my first
This is a
punk rock
58, I'm sorry, it's not a 57, they're almost the same length. But that recording, which sounds, every time I listen to it, I think, sounds pretty good. Play it again, yeah, go on. Sounds pretty good for a 58, though, right? I'm like 4 feet from those cows. They're closer than they are in this picture.
So being literal is a kind of jump. It's a leap of faith that the literal objects will give up something poetically that's compelling, and it might determine a tempo. Let's say you're playing teeth, and then a sort of tempo emerges, and that's your tempo, and that turns out to be a kind of jazz tempo, or in this case, a kind of like boogie-woogie shuffle sound, and then you play a goose call that imitates the sound of a goose, and then that turns into a kind of trumpet line. And so for us, we aren't interested in belonging in any genre. We don't really have a home. We like to work with objects, and the objects suggest a genre, and then we plug into wherever the objects are taking us. And it's a kind of animist faith in the objects. And in a lot of cases, it winds up confirming itself later. I was reading Wittgenstein's Culture and Value, and he describes that the fact that when he listened to his favorite music, which was always classical, he would have totally hated our music. He likes, Schubert. But when Wittgenstein would listen to classical music, he would grind his teeth rhythmically along to the music. When I learned this, I realized, aha, we did it. We made the right rhythm for Wittgenstein. The song then is an assemblage at the level of meaning. It's an assemblage at the level of objects. It's an assemblage socially in that it produces relationships between cows and farmer and Matmos, between you and myself on stage explaining it. Also in the moment of performance, when we play it live, we bring roses and we get people from the audience to drum with roses, and we start with just drumming with roses. So this is us playing in a public park in Paris. I don't know who this dude is, but he played a mean bouquet. And
here's what I'd like to get from this photograph. A gentleman's tie should touch his belt. It should not ride many inches above the belt, nor, and this is more popular, should a gentleman's tie go below his belt. This should not happen. This is my PowerPoint lesson of how to learn from what Martin is not doing. It embarrasses me every time that picture comes up. I think I'm rearing back though.
yeah.
So, gents, if you were to get a second thing out of this from me, tie it again. Go make do. Sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, just to hop from this one to the last piece that we played at the concert. That was a concert before we were just talking about ourselves.
Good stuff.
They were a legendary punk and hardcore band from Los Angeles, late 70s, early 80s. And if you were a fan of the band, as a way of being a groupie, you would get what's called a germs burn, which is that you get a member of the band to burn you with a cigarette inside your left wrist. So I got the drummer, Don, to burn me, and we shot video of it and recorded the sound of my flesh burning. And then those were the sounds that we were playing at the start of the piece and manipulating. So that was an endless kind of loop of grinding and tweaking out the sounds of burning human flesh. And then we shot video every day for months of the healing process as the burn becomes this sort of smooth white circle inside your wrist.
About 2 weeks, actually.
Oh, sorry. The purpose of it, I guess, is that audio storage, whether you're talking about samplers or laptops, are machines for remembering, essentially. They gather content and they store it and they keep it safe for you, but they also, of course, compromise it. They dither it, they filter it, they're lossy mediums. They affect the formal outcome, and this was our way of sort of modeling the morning process itself, and hopefully creating a sort of ripple effect outwards, because every time we play it, we give someone in the audience a very bad mohawk, and we want to thank our trusty participant for joining us. All right, I think we should just take questions now, because we've been yapping an awful
Does
lot.
anybody have any questions? Good. Oh, yes, go on. It's a sort of cascade thing where, in short, the answer is no. But I mean, we record the sounds, then we listen back to the recordings of the sounds, and we find the parts that are, I mean, it sounds idiotic, but that are good, like that are the combination of interesting sound with good recording, and we cut those out. And so basically we cut away all the crap, and then we have a little collection of the best bits of that recording. And then we look for, generally when we're starting a song, we look for something that fell into some kind of rhythm. Something that's going to sound good, paste it out. So, you know, and then we'll go look for another one that locks into that one. And then when we're doing the next recording, if we did it in this hardcore of a manner, we look for something, you know, I'd be playing an object, you know, whatever it was, and trying to make a sound that I knew went with that one. And that sort of decision-making process, building up from the beginning, is, you know, all the way to mastering the thing at the end. That's how those decisions are made, whatever serves the song.
Yeah, processing can be a way of just putting sound into an artificial space, and curating the poetics of the space that you put the sound into is a big decision. So we were working with these latex t-shirts, and they made these squeaky noises like ducks. So we thought, how can we make the latex fetish t-shirt sound more like a duck? Well, we'll put a recording of our cut up on a cassette and take it to the edge of a bay where there are real ducks and play our latex t-shirt for ducks, and then record the sound of the latex t-shirt in this environment that acoustically...
So there's an answer that makes it sound like yes.
So sometimes, yeah, sometimes not. I gotta go with what sounds good.
See, I'm like, no, what makes a good song? That's what we're doing. He's like, no, what
makes a good talk?
Sticks with the, that sticks with the conceptual rigor. So, yeah. But we never fight.
That's the beauty of it.
Yes. Busted.
Yeah, guilty. I mean, the body is something, I'm really inspired by 70s body art, specifically in Marina Abramovich and the kind of extreme works about pain and masochism that she did in the 70s. And I find it very fertile and inspiring, her practice. I think because my father is a cosmetic surgeon, I grew up with that as my home environment, and so sort of seeing representations of the body as something that you can change and transform and extend with technology. I don't find it your values are so superficial. Instead I think no, this is amazing. Obviously it's hugely fraught with social problems and issues about what constitutes beauty and issues about race and ideology, so it's certainly not innocent. But I think it's clearly the first model for, well, why do I make music by taking little tiny cuts and slices and snips and reforming? It's an eatable drum. I'm pretending to be my dad.
And I, on the practical end of things, it's convenient. It's right there. When at a loss. That was a shitty sound. But, there's that.
Ready to hand.
Ready to hand. It wasn't just body sounds. Oh, it's fluid. Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, we've just made a record with this Brooklyn quartet called So Percussion, and they wanted to make this song based on water really badly, and it was totally their idea, not our idea. And when we're working on it with them, they're creating these beautiful silvery textures of water, and Martin's playing this bucket of water, and there's steel drums, and it's just a gorgeous kind of tinkly silver piece, but it really, really sounds like a dude taking a piss.
I think more solid waste, actually, because there are sudden bursts.
And we totally tried to tell them, like, you really
Well,
can't.
it's much worse because they had a gate on it, if anybody knows, like, an audio gate doesn't allow things to just flow as they would naturally, but when a silence is reached, it's an absolute silence, and then it opens up again. And they put a gate on this thing for entirely technical reasons. On this, like, so it became. Except I'm not even like, it really sounds. That record is coming out, so you can judge for yourself. Chance for a plug. I'm not gonna do it. I don't think Drew and I have ever stood together with my